The participants today are Lisa Mills, and Manoj Chopra. We join their conversation in the faculty lounge.
Put it together over there, and they can't step into the water, so they have to reach over and put them together, and it's very exciting. I've had this experience working with the students on the Steel Bridge, and they always enjoy it. We get people at freshman level already interested in taking part in this competition.
Well, that's one of the things I thought that also was similar between the two of us, is that what you do is very applied.
Yes,
you know, it's something that it's a skills-based thing as well, you know, that involves a lot of intellectual work. When the two come together, I think that's really interesting.
That is true, that's true. But the best way to learn is hands-on. And civil engineering, more than any other discipline, really is something, whatever you build, it's out there for people to see, for people to use. It's also a challenging profession in the sense that there's a lot of responsibility. If you do something bad, you know, there are life and death repercussions sometimes. But in most cases, it's very enjoyable to see what you have built. And I find that our students are typically, the demographics is that they like to work with their hands to build things. But there are also office jobs where you design things. You're a consultant, and you do the calculations, and you come up with a design on paper.
You know, I would have to argue with you that my field is also one of the fields that where you can see the result of the students' work so clearly in the media, which is just it's overwhelming how much media we're all exposed to every day, and the effect of that media. And when the media is not well done, everybody talks about that as well, though it's not so much a life or death situation, but it is very applied. I was talking to our research chair in the Arts and Humanities this week, Key Francis, and he said something that I thought was very interesting. He said, in a university setting, our responsibility as faculty members is to bring forward new knowledge, and that gets a lot of attention in academic circles. But he also strongly believes that our other role is to bring forward the application of that knowledge, and that doesn't get quite so much as attention, although it's so apparent, you know, in the real world, from a bridge to a television program that everybody watches or crosses over.
I agree, completely. Lisa, tell me a little bit more about your background in media then.
Well, you know, the reason why I wound up in television was really an accident. I had wanted to go into and be a newspaper reporter, and at my little liberal arts college in Jacksonville, Florida, they didn't have any internship programs there, so I just made telephone calls around and was able to get my foot in the door at a local television station, and wound up working in broadcast journalism completely by accident. But boy, it was a great profession, and the reason why I decided to go into journalism is because I just wanted to find some profession where I could write for a living. It seemed to be the only thing that I was ever really very good at, was putting sentences together. But then when I got into television, I realized that it's a medium that's also quite visual, and there's a lot of creative opportunities in terms of shooting and juxtaposing shots together and editing and trying to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And every time I sat down to write a story about something on television news, I would try to think to myself, you know, where do I begin? And then where's this story going to wind up? And who are the most important people to talk about in this story? And so now that I'm teaching in film, I'm applying that to storytelling in movies and documentaries.
Sure. But let me ask you a question. Do you think that television is now becoming more technology and less art?
I think that too often, yes. Just because you can do a live shot on something that's happening right now doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good idea. And I think that too many times the technology drives the content, and I think it should be the other way around. If you have an interesting story to tell or some important information to convey, the technology is there to help you do that better. I don't think the technology is there just to take and go do something with because you can.
Because you have to use it.
Yes.
That's true. How about journalism? Do you think the standards of journalism are reduced as more media outlets take over? You have to produce large volume of material. Do you think that's something?
I think that the quality of journalism is in question because of all of the competition. And because it is such a profit-driven, the large corporate media is so profit-driven. But this, we whine about this now in the world of 500 channels, on the satellite. But this has really always been true about journalism, all the way back to when, newspapers competed with each other. The publishers were all about the dime and circulation. And so I think that it's the same basic problem. It's just magnified because the media is so invasive. It's everywhere. And so we've always had bad journalism. We're just getting more bad journalism now because there's more outlets, right?
Yeah. That's interesting.
Being from Jacksonville, which has the St. Johns River running through it, my life growing up was all about whether or not a place we were going was on our side of the river or the other side of the river. It seemed like not a day went by that we didn't cross a bridge. And I remember one of the most exciting moments when I learned how to drive was when my daddy was with me in the passenger seat and he let me drive over the Matthews Bridge over the St. Johns River. I've just always been fascinated with bridges, and everywhere I travel, I take pictures of bridges. So I wondered if I could talk to you some more about bridges, and I brought some pictures.
Sure.
I had a great opportunity to go to Sweden and do some teaching at the School of Communication in Jönköping. And I took a road trip one day and went down to Copenhagen, and we crossed over the water. I guess it goes between the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. There's the water goes between Denmark and Sweden. And we crossed over this cool bridge, and I took a picture of it from the car. And I didn't understand how this bridge could be standing. See, I'm a nerd who loves this program on A&E called Modern Marvels. I think I've seen every episode of Modern Marvels.
That's right.
So my friend's driving across this bridge, and I'm taking all these pictures of it, and it's got these triangles on the top of it. There's 4 triangles on it, and they're like
cables.
Like cables.
That's right.
But they're not across the whole bridge. They're only in the middle. So I don't understand how this bridge could be standing.
Well, it's what we call a cable-stayed bridge or a suspension bridge, and what it does, it uses certain pillars in strategic locations to hang the deck. So what it's doing is essentially using those pillars that you mentioned, the triangles, and the cables are just holding up the deck. And what happens is there's a bend to it, so that when the cars go over it, the deck essentially goes up and down a little bit, but the cables get tight and then they hold them. I mean, that's the simple way to explain a cable-stayed bridge. But we have examples of that in Florida,
We've
quite a few.
got the Dames Point Bridge there near where I grew up.
That's right.
Like that too.
But cable-stayed bridges are one of the prettiest looking bridges. Some of them, instead of simple ones like the ones you see in the Keys or the ones that we have out here, quite a few. It's more expensive, but it's really where architecture and engineering merge and become very exciting.
Now, I saw on an episode of Modern Marvels where they talked about how important the soil is for these pylons, and I saw on your website's really cool. There's a lot going on your website.
Thank
it's
you.
Very dynamic. I loved it because there's a lot of pictures of students doing things on it, and a picture of the Leaning Tower of Pisa and bridges and all of that. And when I went to the site, it taught me that your specialty is studying the soil where pylons go in. And so I thought that was really cool that you and I study the same thing, because I study dirt as well. I study political advertising.
That's a good one.
So we both study dirt.
Well, I guess
so we should talk about dirt here on this program.
I guess this could be the Dirt Bag Lounge. Yes, it is. My area is soils, and The reason why I picked soils was when I had a choice of the different disciplines of civil engineering, which is structures, soils, water, transportation, and construction. I picked soils because it's the most difficult. It's all buried. You don't know what's down there. It's amazing. You could look for what's going on here, and the soil somewhere else would be completely different. So what I wanted to do was to come up with the physics, the understanding of what the soil will do under different situations. And so going back to some of the early work that I did, it was primarily relating what happens to soils under earthquakes. I mean, that is a very difficult situation. In Japan, Kobe, when they had the earthquake, an entire port facility disappeared because it was man-made by filling in soil. So soil, what may look very stable, could suddenly become very unstable. And the example of that, of course, is sinkholes.
We don't have to worry about earthquakes in Florida, but we've got plenty of sinkholes.
We sure do. We sure do. And there are no outer signs. There's some debate on that. You could go high enough and do aerial photography and see potential areas where sinkholes may happen. But there's an uncertainty associated with that. You don't know whether it's true or not. But sinkholes are a big challenge for us, and that's primarily because of the limestone that we have. It's gradually being crushed, and it's being eaten away by the water as it goes through, and it causes the surface to become weak. But again, this is an exciting field because again, it's buried. It's unknown. It's a lot of unknown characteristics. Mm-hmm. So I have studied soil behavior from the beginning. I look at soils also in a different way, how they support the loads. Ultimately, when we build something, we have to put it on stable material. So I look at properties of the property of the soil as far as stability of the soil goes. And then lately, I've been looking at pavements also because we have, particularly with the growth in the state, we now have to make sure that we don't pave the entire state. We're getting to a point where we might. Yes. If you look at starting our eastern shore, if you start from south of Miami, I think we may reach a point where all the way up to where we are in Cocoa could all be paved, the entire coast, and that's just unacceptable. So we're looking at something, and I'll talk about it a little bit more maybe a little later, but we're looking at something called pervious concrete pavements, permeable pavements.
I know about that,
right.
But I had a student do a news report about that, and you probably helped them,
sure
so let
did.
me thank you for that.
Okay.
But what he did was he took a pitcher of water
yes.
and poured it onto the concrete, and instead of it running out like a puddle, it went through the concrete. It's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen.
Yes, it's not a new idea. I'm not going to claim that, but it's something that hasn't been used in Florida for a while, and it's ideal for low load areas. What I mean by you can't drive very heavy trucks on it because you're losing a certain amount of strength, but it's great for parking lots, for sidewalks, for anything where you would allow the water to go seep through and you don't have to have very heavy traffic on it.
Wow. You know, you were talking about how what you study, your dirt, is unpredictable because you don't really know what's down there until you start digging. Well, the dirt that I study is really unpredictable too because politicians never know how their political ads are going to be perceived until they get them on the air. So one of the things that I look at is I will put an ad, I do experimental stuff, and I'll put an ad on television or the web, and I'll show it to a group of people, and I'll do a pre-test, post-test experiment where I'll measure their evaluation of a candidate, their levels of political cynicism, which we're very concerned about in media effects studies, their level of information seeking, their level of general political knowledge before they see the political ad, and then I'll measure it again after, just to try to see if there's any way, you know, to make a model to predict what aspects of a political ad are effective and which ones aren't effective. The political ads aren't going away. Unfortunately, they just continue to proliferate along with everything else in the media. And so that's how my research is applied somewhat
How
to
do you pick
politicians.
the focus groups? How do you pick the people that you're asking these questions?
Well, because I'm just a junior faculty member at this point, most of the research I've done has been with students. But I think that's valid because right now we're very concerned about how young people perceive politics and political messages and political images. And we've got some evidence to show that these political ads are increasing their levels of cynicism, and that's not good for our democracy. And so if we can continue to do research that indicates this, perhaps maybe we can draw attention to it.
Have you always had negative ads?
Well, negative ads have always been around because they work. We do know that from the literature. And you know what else is surprising about negative ads? People learn from them. Because most negative ads are issue-oriented. They actually talk about politicians' stances one way or the other, or the way they voted, or the way they did not vote. In fact, there's a lot of research that has empirical evidence that people learn more from political ads than they do from newscasts.
Right.
Now, there are a lot of factors about that message. You know, political ads repeat over and over again, so if people see them over and over again, then they're more likely to pick up information, you know, from
Right.
something they see over and over again. But it's really not good because more of these political ads are being placed in the commercial breaks of newscasts, which actually adds to the ad's credibility. And so people are actually more liable to see more minutes of political ads during a newscast than they are to see objective journalistic coverage
Cover
of
the news.
politics
The lines
in a
get blurred.
newscast.
That's
Yes,
right.
they do get blurred.
Do you have to pay more for a certain time placement of
You
the ad?
do, and that's some of the most expensive time is during a local newscast. But you know what's also interesting right now is the proliferation of political ads on the web, which they don't have to pay for that airtime
Right.
at all. They can put an ad on a website that's 2 or 3 minutes long, whereas to buy a spot on television, you're limited to 30 seconds. And these ads are becoming viral. In other words, you can go to a particular politician's website and they'll have a 2 or 3 minute political ad on the site, and you can email that ad to your friends or your group of friends. And
Post
so,
it on YouTube or something.
Right, post it up there. And so that's one of the new things I'm starting to study is the viral nature of political messages on the web. So I don't know.
It's an exciting field, and you know, I've always been a political junkie, so
Oh.
I enjoy following you know, what goes on in the political arena. And ads have certainly taken a turn towards just large volume, but also the quality. I mean,
Yes.
criticizing other people is okay, but getting personal and
They're getting
just the content
nastier and
as well.
nastier. And again, one of the reasons is because, unfortunately, they're effective. They go to that human side that a lot of us don't like to admit, you know, is there, and
Yes.
the messages, you know, actually do the work that is intended. And so, one of the things I want to try to find out in my research is why that is.
How about the level of knowledge that the public has? Is that a problem?
You know, there's a debate, first of all, about whether or not that really matters. We know that people in this country really don't know very much about their governmental systems. But does that really matter in their ability to choose a good candidate and go out and vote for them? That's really where that debate lies. And the folks over in the political science department have some different ideas about that than the folks in my area, which is political communication. You know, over and over again, like when I do my research, I find that students really don't know who their senators are. I most recently did a study, this is the first time this has ever happened, where we actually had these third-party groups produce and air ads for and against Supreme Court nominees.
Wow.
And so that process is becoming politicized. And so I took some of those ads and I put them before test groups. And I asked them before they saw the ad if they even knew how many justices sit on the Supreme Court, if they knew who their senators were, if they knew anything about the confirmation process and the nomination process. And they knew very little about it. And one of the concerns about these ads and the politicization of the Supreme Court nominee and confirmation process is this. We know that political ads, we have good evidence that political ads make people cynical about the political process. Now, my new line of research is aimed at finding out whether or not the politicization of the judicial system might make people more cynical about the judicial process. So we have to be careful, about the media messages and the unintended effects that they have out there, because, voters' ability to go and cast a ballot, or their confidence in our political system, is really important, especially when the nation reaches turning points.
That's
like right now.
The cynicism. What is the source of the cynicism? Is it just natural partisanship, or is it because they feel that everything that's in politics is in the wrong direction?
Well, what's interesting about cynicism is we find that as partisanship decreases, the younger people coming up are much less dedicated to one party or another, the left or the right. They see themselves as independents because they've lost faith in either of the two dominating parties. Right. So it's not as a result of partisanship, actually. It's as a result of the rejection of both of those parties, and nowhere for them to go. They're not being served. They don't feel they're being served by the left or the right.
That's true. But you still think that politics is local, and the issues are primarily what concerns them on a day-to-day basis?
I think that you can be very involved in an issue and be very concerned about your community and vote in your local elections and not know how many justices sit on the Supreme Court. I mean, there's a lot of this has to be relevant to a person's day-to-day actions. And so I don't lose faith in the ability of our population to keep a democracy going just because some political surveys show that they don't know much about the process, or they can't name, the third president of the United States or something like that. I think that as long as they're engaged in important issues in their local community, that's what matters. And that's why I'm a proponent of local media. Local media are critical in this role because they have to try to get people engaged in these local issues. And local media is threatened right now because many of the local media outlets are owned by large corporations. And decisions are made about programming in the local media far away in New York boardrooms. And I think those decisions need to come back to where the license is held in a local community. You know what? I produced a local program here in Central Florida for a couple of years. That was on local issues. And do you know that each day, before I could put that program on the air, I had to fax my show lineup to New York
to get approval? That's amazing.
I'm concerned about that.
Why? Is it a business decision, or is content controlled that closely by the bureaucracy again?
I think it's an economic consideration. I don't think that, I got the perception that the corporate programming directors weren't so much concerned with the topics that were being covered as they were concerned with whether or not those topics could draw an audience.
Yes.
So
the numbers.
Right.
Well, that's interesting.
Now, do you face economic concerns like that in your industry as well? I mean, you have to build a bridge that's going to withstand, time. I bet that there's some concerns that engineers have practically as well about the quality, of their work, and making sure that, that the bridge that they think ought to be built actually does get built?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think economic concerns are important for us, but more than that is safety. The main goal for engineers is to build something that is going to last its service life before it has to be renovated, but also must be safe for people to use. So what we have are essentially civil engineering is code driven. There's a lot of practices that have been established and you have to follow those. And built into that is a large amount of factors of safety. So we're never intentionally getting close to the border of safe versus unsafe. What we find is that quite often people do go with the cheapest alternative. Not just the bid process, but even the quality. If you can get something that looks nice, it will cost more. But in some cases, you get people with stronger opinions, and they say, "No, this is the best way to handle it." That's very true, particularly if it's trying to have a sense of what a community should look like. So you don't want to put something in a community that's not going to go with that community. Environmental effects. You don't want to damage the environment, so you sometimes will go for a more costlier alternative to avoid damaging the environment.
I brought a picture in of a bridge. It's called the Sundial Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was designed by my favorite architect, Santiago Calatrava.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to be building the new transportation center at the World Trade Center in New York. This bridge, I looked at it, I guess it's called like a cantilever bridge.
Yes.
It only has one major
One side.
pylon
Yes.
on it. It's so beautiful. But I don't understand how something like that could stand. But I really admire